Hi students, it's Arthur, and welcome to the second in the resume series, Resume 2. In this video, we're going to go back to the real estate slide here shortly, and we're going to begin a deep dive into each section, what's expected, and how to write excellent content for each. However, I'll note that the experience section I'm going to be pushing out until the next video or the third video when we speak a little bit more about writing, including how to use AI for some of these sections. This is, of course, a reminder also to check out the module resources. The resume section has a lot of resources, including the UNCW templates, which we recommend that you use if you're just kind of starting out. If you're going to redo your resume from a previous version or one from a template that I've talked about with you before, could be problematic, I suggest you start with UNCW templates. It's a good place to start. Shortcut the process a little bit, and it will help you a little bit with the formatting. But there are a lot of other resources that cover everything you wanted to know about resumes, but we're afraid to ask. So, I know most of you haven't seen this slide before. It's a joke. But remember, everything that we do in this course, all the documents we produce, the resume in this particular case, it's about them. We're going to try to convince them that you're the best candidate for this role. All right, back to the resume real estate. So we're revisiting this slide, and we're going to talk about what to do, first of all, at a broad level. So we've got a lot of sections, and you don't really need to use them all. We're only going to use the ones that are the most relevant for you. A good strategy with your resume is really to start with no length or end in mind. So what we want to do is we want to start to write with purpose, relevance, and conciseness, not with any particular length in mind, not meaning that we're going to try to write this from scratch to just to be one page. Let's just write everything, get everything on paper. Don't worry about formatting. Don't worry about spacing, margins, font size. Let's just write the resume such that it has everything on it that you may want to consider using. And then we can use this as your foundation or base resume going forward. When we talk about publishing one or making one available for external use, then we can edit that back to a one-pager for relevance to the career and roles that you're interested in, using precise or targeted language, kind of ruthlessly eliminating the fluff, and then carefully thinking about the formatting, such as the font size, the font choice, managing the margins, and then spacing, formatting tools and use that we can use in Word to get to that one-page format that we're looking for. So, if you have done any research on resumes or taken a look at templates or anything like that, you'll notice that a lot of resumes have a profile or a summary statement. Now, this is not an objective statement. An objective statement is kind of an old school common practice that really is not what we're looking for in today's resumes. That's going to be much more of a profile summary. Now, it's common practice not to have a summary of any kind on a student resume. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be used, just that there is more focus on the one-pager and the format, and adding that information may take away from important information that should be included. But most importantly, writing a quality profile summary has to add value, and it isn't just summarizing what's already in your resume or just fluffy words saying that I'm a good hard worker who's good at problem solving, and I'm a strong communicator, and I'm interested in a finance role. Those words don't add any value to the resume, and if they don't add value, we're going to cut them. However, some people may have enough experience, could have a military background that is going to highlight some things that maybe a student resume might not have. So ultimately, my decision would be to say not to consider it at all unless you have information equivalent to the experienced resume or more. An example resume for a college student using a summary section targeting specific roles is shown here. You can also see some formatting options that you can use to add personal branding to your resume, and I do this routinely with my own clients. Now, a reminder on alignment. Yep, I'm totally crazy and psychotic on this topic. But you never know who's reading and judging your resume. It could be me or somebody like me as a hiring manager. And one of the things I do in this class, and I've mentioned it before, is I want to give you all the tiebreakers so that you win every single tiebreaker, or at least you move on to the next tiebreaker. So eliminating any potential issues that might eliminate you, well, we're going to eliminate them first. And that's why I have this sort of relentless perfectionist streak in me that I'm trying to share with you for your resume. So now let's talk about name and contact info. First of all, the resume templates that you have are going to have, if you already haven't noticed, they're going to say beginning resume, developing resume, or experienced resume at the top. That's just a placeholder for your name. Yes, I'm saying it that way. It's a placeholder for your name. We've had a lot of students that will leave that on there and then add their name somewhere else. That's not the point. Replace the words beginning resume or the other two options with your first and last name. We'll talk a little bit more about your name in a minute. Email address. If you are not a senior, I would recommend you go ahead and use your UNCW email. But it really is your choice here. You can choose to use your professional email, and we'll talk about what's professional here in a moment. And then in addition to that, the address information. You'll notice this resume does not have any address information. Quite frankly, it's optional, and there are some strategies around that about whether or not you include it, whether or not you include where you actually are as the city and state, or whether you actually put in there where you want to be. And that is where I would say, if you're going to use area, make sure it's the area you want to be in, whether it's Wilmington, Raleigh, Atlanta, Portland, whatever, okay? So the other thing I wanted to mention is that your LinkedIn URL should be customized. So if you're new to LinkedIn and you haven't done this before, this little graphic shows you where you can go into the module resources, and there's a short video on how to customize your profile URL in LinkedIn. And I would make that happen as soon as possible to get that on your first draft resume. So notice here I changed the template to the experience template so you can see the difference in style used for this information. You have flexibility within reason to choose what you like best. Even if the content is the basic, but you like this style, then use this style. It's perfectly fine. So first of all, notice that it looks like this information, the name and contact, are in the actual page header. It is not. This is actually in the body of the document. It just looks like it's the header. There's also nothing in the footer, and that's all by design, because you don't want information that you want to be read by the applicant tracking system in either the header or the footer, because the ATS systems will normally not read those. Now that may change in the future, or a more modern ATS system might actually read it, but we can't know, and we won't know what kind of system they have, so better safe than sorry. And as you saw before, normal formatting, bold, italics, underlining, all of that's fine, and you can see the use of that throughout this document and the others. But make sure you use it lightly and consistently. One of the things we say, if everything's in bold, to emphasize it, then at the end of the day, nothing is emphasized because you've got too many things emphasized. And then the other thing is, you saw on that example resume that I showed, lines and shading can also be used to create some visual interest on the resumes as well. So dates. Dates are very important, and as you now know, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, clearly. And if you decide to revolt against me, that's perfectly fine. Just ensure that all your dates are consistently and identically aligned in the document. So they don't have to be right justified as long as they're exactly the same in the document wherever you decide to put them, and they're not kind of bouncing around all over the place on the page. Of course, the exception we talked about before is the graduation date. The graduation date should show the expected grad date, not a start-end format. If you're in a current position, I recommend that you use the start date and end date and use the word present You can also use the word current, but I prefer the word present if you're presently employed at a company or engaged in an organization. And you'll notice that the date format is the same for extracurricular activities as it is in volunteerism as well. Now, dates, where they actually belong, do they belong with the company or the role title? Doesn't matter. Just be consistent. If you had two roles in the same company, I actually do recommend you attach the date with the role title and then make sure you're doing that consistently. So even if it's a job, another job that you only had one role in for that period of time, make sure you put the date with in the same format, in the same place as you did with the previous entry. Let's go on to education now. So first of all, you want to make sure you use the proper name for the university, your major, and your concentration. Don't put Bachelor of Science in Supply Chain Management. That's actually not your degree. It's in Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, concentration, Supply Chain Management. You can word it Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a Supply Chain Management concentration, and you can actually put that all in one line if you wish, if you need to save some space. There's some variations allowed here, but just make sure you spell out everything properly. And again, one mistake students often make is the dates. They'll put a start and end date like they do with the experiences, and as you know now, just put the expected grad date, not a start and end. GPA, if your GPA is 3.0 or above, we highly recommend that you include it. And if it's below 3.0, we highly recommend that you don't include it. That's sort of the break point about whether or not we would include it. If you have any honors, list them. We want to see them. That actually showcases your academic talent. And so include it here. And for instance, Dean's List, and show the number of semesters that you've earned that honor if it's multiple semesters. Moving on to the developing resume, using this example regarding coursework. If you're taking a course this semester and you want to include it as something relevant for your major, it's okay to include a course that you haven't completed yet, as long as you're actually working on that in the same semester. Extracurricular activities related to the university could be tucked in here, but more than likely, if we're talking about those kinds of things, it's probably going to be like a student organization or club, a fraternity, sorority. Those kinds of things should go into student organizations or volunteerism, depending on what it is you're doing. You could also add extracurricular activities if you're involved in sports, such as a varsity team or something like that. We do not want to see your involvement in club sports, however, unless you are holding a leadership position in those kinds of clubs or organizations. So, multiple colleges or community college. If you've got another college that you've transferred from, another university I should say, it's likely that you want to keep it at least until you've got a couple of semesters behind you. And the same goes for community college. Also, if you've earned an associate degree from the community college, it's perfectly fine to put that in there. And similarly, you would want to show the graduation month and year. Now, there are exceptions to this rule, but it's not an absolute. Also, when we're talking about exceptions, honestly, no high school, period, end of discussion, with only extreme exceptions. So if you went to a high school that has some sort of very prestigious affiliation with it, then I would say, even still, I'm quite skeptical whether or not you should include it. And then essentially anything from the area of your high school is not to be included. That's going to be clubs. Even if you were a president of a club and you were a varsity captain on a sports team, if you're not doing that sport anymore, we're probably going to graduate that on to another discussion. Now, a lot of this stuff you're more than welcome to include on LinkedIn, just not on your resume. We only want relevant things that are relevant to the role and the career you're looking for at this point. Now, again, there's always exceptions, so don't take everything as an absolute. So just ask a question if you have any questions about what you should include or not. That goes the same for standardized scores. Even if you aced your SAT, no one really cares anymore. Sorry. So work experience. As I said, I'm going to speak to this issue in the next video in the resume series, as this topic is the longest and the most critical to discuss. So we'll just move on past that. So the additional sections that we've got are going to be extracurricular activities, volunteerism, organizations, things of that sort. In addition to that, we're going to have interests and skills, which might include licensing and certifications. So the one thing here that I want to note, though, is just not to put the wrong thing in the wrong section. Students will sometimes put in organizations, frats, clubs. They'll put that in the work experience section where it definitely does not belong. Show everything in their proper section. And from an order perspective, if you've got multiple entries within each section, they should be in reverse chronological order, which means most recent first, followed sequentially to older positions. If you've got two roles or had two roles concurrently, and for instance, you've got two jobs today, you're going to want to order those in this kind of following order. First, it's the relevance to the job you're applying for. So if one of the positions is something that very closely relates to what you want to do, and the other one is literally just a part-time job just to make money, make sure you show the relevant job first, even if it doesn't follow the rest of the rules. The importance and scope of the role. Let me actually go back to number one. When I mentioned, even if it's not relevant, these might be two jobs that you're currently working at today. You wouldn't put a job that you left in the past ahead of a current job that you're working. Again, the exceptions are if you have an internship, for instance, you could actually separate internship experience from work experience into two different sections. That would allow you to move the internship role up to feature it in your resume. Anyway, the number two in this order of importance is the importance and scope of the role. So if it has a relationship to the role and the relevance that we're talking about, or it's a much bigger job than the other part-time position, then you might put that position ahead of another one. And then the last thing we're probably going to focus on is if they're kind of relatively similar or you don't really care so much, the proper etiquette is to use the one that has your shortest tenure or has the most recent start date and listing that first. So that's kind of the follow-up that you do with that in order. And then we're going to do the same thing with experience, and then I'll mention this again in the experience video. Languages. If you have languages, we definitely want to highlight them. And then we want to highlight them with your proficiency level. Now, so we're all assuming here in this first example that English is your first language or your native language, and you have another proficiency in another language or more than one. I would say that if you have a very basic level of proficiency, which means sort of travel level or maybe slightly above, I don't think it's really necessary to include it here, unless there's some very specific reason why you might want to include it. For instance, you might be taking courses to get better proficiency, or you might be interested in a role that requires Spanish speaking, for instance, and your light Spanish might be helpful, but you do want to be clear and transparent about your level of proficiency. My gut tells me that if you just have a basic level, we shouldn't include the language skill. However, once you reach intermediate level or higher, and particularly if you've actually taken a test to document your proficiency, we really want to highlight your language skills. That's a very high level competency that companies love to see, so we want to showcase that. If you'll notice on here, there's an interests section. You could replace that with skills. You'll notice that it says list personal interests or update the header to skills and include technical skills instead. Only on the very, very most basic resume would I even consider using a personal interest list. And even then, I would say definitely not use it. So again, I'm not going to stick to absolutes, but my suggestion is you don't put that in there. And Organizations and volunteerism is very important, so we definitely would want to include those. But again, we want to make sure it's not a frivolous activity, or what might be perceived, I should say, as a frivolous activity. So it should be related to some sort of professional skills that you need to get or that you could demonstrate using that particular entry. And if you can't tell any good stories about it that is for a professional and showcase your skills, then I would just say we leave it off the resume entirely. And ultimately, we won't want to put anything in the work experience section that is not a paid position. So that's another thing to be thinking about. If you choose to use skills, we always want to use hard and technical skills only, preferably related to or transferable to the roles you're interested in. We're not going to use particularly very bland soft skills like communications, problem solving. Those kinds of skills should be shown and used in context in the bullets you're going to write in the different sections. That should be your best practice. So as I said, personal interest, no one really wants to see them at this point. The exception, and why I highlight this here, is that unless it's related to the role somehow, or it's a very unusual activity that you're involved in. So some examples of that might be that you're a competitive triathlete, for instance, or you're involved in activities that's involved in some sort of technology that might be opening up at this point. AI might be one if you can demonstrate significant technical prowess in that. So those would be some of the exceptions that you might use. These might be things that actually would be great conversation starters in a conversation. Those would be the situations where you would want to put something that's personal in here, but that's going to be unique and unusual for most people. So that's it for the second of this video series. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you on the third one, and we will talk soon.